This is a short presentation really focusing on the importance of farm families meeting regularly. We all know that communication is a real challenge. Often farm families feel, because they are spending a lot of time together, sitting down to meals together, that communication must be happening. But it's often small talk, and the big issues that need to be planned and prepared and then talked about really get missed out. And so the importance of communication can't be underrated. And in fact, Peter Drucker, one of the management gurus that's written many books, he says that 60% of management problems in all sorts of organisations are really derived from poor communication. So we can't underrate the importance of this at all. So what I wanted to do is just talk briefly about a case study of our own family. Not that we're doing anything particularly good, you never arrive with this, but we're trying some systems to see if we can improve family communication. And I'd have to say at the outset, we're a small family. We have one son and a daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren, and it's relatively easy because we live closely together. We've sold part of our farm to our son and daughter-in-law to run a tourism business, but nevertheless it's a challenge. But families that have more children, have children off farm, it's a bigger challenge, but the job necessarily has to be done. And we must remember the off-farm children still have a big interest in the family, and of course they have an interest in inheritance and a range of things, so they mustn't be cut out. And one of the important things about formal family meetings is that everyone gets together, everyone hears the same thing, and therefore the chance of misunderstandings or people feeling isolated, which human beings feel really bad if they feel they're being isolated. The chances of that happening are diminished if efforts are made to bring everyone together. It might be a meeting before Christmas when people have come home. It might be a global meeting using technologies these days where people can hook up, they can see one another, they can talk from anywhere in the world, and we know our children spread themselves over the world. So the obstacles to having good formal family meetings are there, but they're not insurmountable. And of course, if those of you who have bigger families, yes, it's a little tougher to get everyone together, but also you've got access to more talent and more thoughts and more input that can really help the family and the family businesses and help one another. So this presentation is really using what we're trying to do as a bit of a case study. Not that we've arrived. You never arrive with communication. We have to keep working on the best way forward. But in order to give you a bit of an idea of where to start on a couple of important things, I've just used what we're doing as a case study. So let's have a little look at some of these things here. So just to give you a picture, very small family, simple family, and son, daughter-in-law, my wife and myself, and 2 grandchildren. And one of the things that's really focused us on our family meetings is that those 2 grandchildren will probably be alive at the end of this century. And so we wanted a mechanism to take some strategic, longer-term views, and we try to have the best part of a 100-year focus, which sounds crazy in a changing world, but if we can gear the people, our grandchildren, all of us, to have the skills and the ability to communicate, the ability to plan, we give it the best chance of our family being strong at the turn of the century with the right sort of values and able to handle any challenges that come along. So it's really families can take a long view, and we're driven by that long view, and family meetings are part of dealing with the long view. So a few background issues to family meetings. Why are regular family meetings so important? Well, as I've said, you'd think because families tend to communicate a lot that they'd cover the big issues. But regrettably, often the big things that are important, the real strategies, the important long-term views, the sharing of goals, those sort of things don't happen. And if they do happen, they happen piecemeal between, say, two family members, and other family members do not hear that communication or do not understand it, and therefore it's not effective in a family context. Everyone needs to hear the same things, and there needs to be a forum where people plan before the meeting. You don't do much work at meetings. You review things at meetings, but you don't do the work. It needs some sort of timelines where people do their planning, get their goals in shape, and that sort of thing, and then come to discuss them in a formal meeting. And so what should be on the agenda? Well, of course, there are always some operational things about diaries and who's planning to go on holidays when, and how you can work together to cover for one another and that sort of thing. There needs to be a look at what's working and what's not in the family, what annoying things are happening that could be changed, who didn't put the tools back in the proper place in the workshop, and proper sharing of machinery, and who left a spray card half full of spray when it should have been emptied out and washed out for the next person. All those little things that can become niggling may not be talked about, but it can lead to conflict. So there's operational stuff. There's also celebration of achievements, which is very important, and often we don't do that in our families. So support for people and support in tough times and operational things. But the real power of family meetings, when you get them going, is that they can be used to review goals, for everyone to understand what one another's goals are, and to be able to say, well, how can we support one another to achieve our goals? It gives us time to do to position members of the family, position one another to help one another. And in a rapidly changing world, it gives us a forum where we can think strategically about what might be coming over the horizon, do some what-ifs, and really start thinking about things the family needs to position itself to do as a family, and also the family businesses, how they might be improved, what opportunities are out there, and so on. And of course, some farm families have formal boards. Well, the formal boards are there to really look at the business side, but don't necessarily look at the family side. But farm family meetings can do both, or they can mainly focus on the family, but also on strategy and where people are going and what their goals are, and then that can be used in a formal business meeting if the family does have a board. So they're the sorts of things that should be on the agenda. Why do they really occur? Well, often people don't like sharing their goals for fear that they mightn't achieve them. If the family isn't an open, communicating family, they might feel they might be criticised, that sort of thing. Often no one steps up to drive and get organised. Nobody particularly likes meetings, so someone has to organise it and make it exciting and and get a schedule together, all that sort of thing. So there are a number of reasons like that. People say they're too busy and so on. And so this important thing of family meetings gets pushed aside. They're a particular challenge for families because families communicate a bit differently to non-family members, and so emotions and that sort of thing can get involved, and so we need a mechanism and some leadership and so on to make sure that emotions are kept under control so that the important business can be done. But they're quite a challenge because families tend to be a bit different from normal businesses. And of course, farm families, the business and the family are interwoven. and it's always a balancing act between the needs of individual family members, the family as a whole, and the business as a whole. And we need a proper forum. Sometimes we'll need someone independent, initially at least, to chair and guide the process. But we need a proper forum to deal with that balancing act between the family and the business and the emotion and that sort of thing. So quite a challenge, but not an insurmountable challenge. And initiating meetings and maintaining momentum, well, we need someone to drive it. We need leadership. We need some excitement. We need to throw some interesting things for discussion into the ring. We need a proper schedule that people agree to sticking with the schedule, an annual schedule of meetings, and people can organise their lives to be available at particular times. So all that sort of thing to get some energy up and some persistence to maintain the momentum so that once you're over that initial hump, family meetings just become the thing that families do, but it's the initial number of meetings until it becomes a pretty automatic thing that the family does and in fact looks forward to as an opportunity to share all sorts of things. So strong leadership from someone in the family to get it going, get the initial meetings going and keep it going. It is a good idea with family meetings, with any meetings really, but particularly family, giving that balancing act, to write out some guidelines. And I like to go through a few that we've figured out, but there are plenty more better ones that you might be able to figure out as well. Guidelines for the way in which people interact with one another and communicate with one another, because when the going gets tough, if you've got something to come back to and say, well, look, we agreed that this is the way we were going to do business and talk to one another, communicate with one another, then it just gives a rock to go back to make sure things don't get out of control and disintegrate and become a negative experience rather than a positive experience. And when children return home, when our son and daughter-in-law were returning home and we were looking at how we might work together and what we might do, we drew up and signed a detailed, it took quite a bit of work, memorandum of understanding which dealt with big things like the finances of how we were going to do the inheritance and succession, because we were looking at what we call a living inheritance, where we were selling part of the farm at a low price to give them our son and daughter-in-law a business that could give them a leg up when they were in their 30s, young enough to do something with it, rather than waiting, as so often happens these days, to when mum and dad die, and often it's too late. The children are in their 60s, 50s or 60s, and their major requirement for expenditure and career growth and so on is past. So meeting guidelines, important for the way we do business. And in a lot of cases when sons or daughters come home and when they marry, those big changes that happen in families, a written memorandum of understanding as to what's going to happen can be very important. Excuse me. And there are always a few handy hints, and my wife is very, very good at this. One of the things that we always do is have a good meal before the meeting. It's amazing how much better you feel, how much less emotion you are when you've got a full stomach and you've socialised over a meal and you've relaxed and you're feeling good. I know some of you might think, oh, I want to go and have a sleep, but we don't want to go that far. But a good meal before a meeting can mean people aren't on edge, they're relaxed, and things will go a lot better. Also, it can be good to go away for the meeting. It signals it as a special event. Go to a local meeting place, or even our family have met while travelling internationally. We were off the train, we can sit down, and very important, of course, in this day and age, phones off, television off, no people visiting and so on. And if you leave the farm, well, you can control the environment a lot better and make sure that everyone can put full attention to the meeting. And also it's important to start when children are young. They get into this habit that this is the way the family does business. The family meets regularly and talks about serious things. And in our case, even now, our 5-year-old granddaughter, she's there, she's playing quietly, but you bet she's absorbing, hey, this family get together, they've got paper, they're talking seriously, and it's more likely that she will very easily get into the habit later on. We'll be discussing holidays and where she wants to go and all this sort of thing, and gradually it just becomes a habit as the way this particular family the family operates and communicates. So it's like a lot of things. Once a habit is created, you can then use that to do all sorts of positive things. Just thought I might say a little bit about personality tests. One of the quirky things about human beings is that opposites attract. And so when people come together as partners, get married and so on, more than likely there'll be different personalities, different ways of viewing the world, and this has a potential source of conflict or a potential source of synergy, of using those different ways of looking at the world in order to get better outcomes. And I think those of you, particularly when you get to my age, you understand that personalities normally don't change, and setting out in a partnership with the objective of changing your partner's personality is a pretty futile exercise and can lead to all sorts of conflict. And so one of the things our family did, and I'd encourage others to do, was to get a professional to do the personality test, so you do understand how different members of the family approach different issues, how they view the world, and then you can start to say, well, what that person's doing to me, maybe I don't feel comfortable with it, but I understand that's the way that person is. So how can I use that particular personality to do positive things, to allow myself to get outside of my own personality a little bit, and get some synergy. And so in broad terms, personality types, some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, and often the two come together, and we need to use the energy and the different ways of going about things that those two types of people do. Some people are sensing, they really like concrete information to make decisions. Some people are intuitive, they're looking to the future, they're looking at different patterns and possibilities as well. So very different approaches to problems and issues. Some people are thinking people, they're logic, they have lists and they really try and nail things down in a logical order. Others are more going on feelings, on values, they're more subjective about how they approach things. And the judging side of the deal is more a planned and organised approach. The perceiving type are flexible, spontaneous, and if they're planning a holiday, they don't want it nailed down to what they're going to do every day or even where they're going to go. They just let things happen. So you can see the potential for conflict, but also see the potential between different personality types, if we understand them, for some real synergy within families and a lot of reduction in conflict, because we understand where people are coming from. So again, not that we're the be-all and end-all, but we had when our son and daughter-in-law were coming home, we had this letter of understanding, which was a very heavy document on financial arrangements, but it even came down to little things about how we were going to jointly share machinery, the things that niggle and can often lead to a lot of conflict in families, how you put things away, storage, where you can store things and where you can't, the sorts of things that can lead to conflict. But it had the big things too, the financial arrangements for the transfer, the inheritance, succession, and so on that we were doing at the time. But the people things, the communication things, we tried to get an agreed set of guidelines which would give us something to come back to if we were having trouble communicating with one another. And this is what we came up with. And a lot of it is just plain good psychology of communication. But number one, we said relationships are everything. And that really has stood us in good stead, because when we're looking at an issue, if we can see the hackles rise, see the conflict, see that if we charged down the road on that particular issue and made decisions, we might damage our relationships with one another, we back off, we think it through, we think if there's another way of doing it, and we try to get everybody on board. That number one, relationships are everything, we've come back to time and time again in our meetings to just help us to stop getting into relationship problems. And so that one's been important to us. The rest of them there are just good communication things. Focus on the issues, not the people. Do a lot of listening instead of a lot of talking, so we hear what people are trying to say. Ask questions rather than make statements, much less confronting on particular issues, and they open up a discussion about particular issues. Communication is a two-way thing, and it's often forgotten. Everybody sits on their hands waiting for the leader to do the communication, and then whinges if that communication doesn't happen. It's up, if you want to learn something, well, you ask, but at the same time you have a responsibility to communicate as well. And accepting responsibility, joint responsibility to resolve challenges rather than dumping on one person or another. It's a we thing rather than a you thing to get things done. These are all pretty logical communication things. Particularly in a farm family where people are living close together and different generations, the respect for one another's independence and privacy is important. Often conflicts in farm families arise because people don't do this. They're watching one another, the parents are listening for their son or daughter to come home at night from a party or whatever and comment on it next morning, and it can lead to real conflict. Public criticism is another thing that happens with farm families and is very destructive, where one member of the family will be down at a hotel slinging off about the parents or another member of the family, and it just and that other member of the family knows that's going on, and that just leads to bad relationships and conflict. And number 9 is just another one of the standard rules that if you really want to get on with someone, you can't have 50-50 give and take on any given day. You've got to be prepared to give more and receive a bit less in the hope that with good relationships, what goes around will come around. And on the very positive side, number 10, we wrote down in our guidelines, we will celebrate success and provide support in tough times. And on top of that, we said we need to have a laugh. Humour is compulsory, and we do a lot of that even in our meetings. It helps break the tension and helps us get more enjoyment out of our meetings. So they're just some guidelines. Now, again, we haven't arrived by any means, but I just thought I would put the bones of a particular agenda just to help see how do you set up a formal agenda for a family meeting, what sorts of things might be on it. And so I just plucked out a particular agenda for a meeting back in 2010, not too long after our son and daughter-in-law had come home. So we were dealing with some of these base issues of guidelines and letters of understanding and so on. And so a welcome and introduction, appointment of chair. We rotate the chairs and recorders so that everybody gets involved. Involvement is very important in anything, and so we don't want someone to be in the chair all the time controlling meetings and so on. We want everyone to learn their skills, but also to have that involvement and feel that there's equality and fairness in the way meetings are run. It's a formal meeting, so we have minutes from meetings and we review those minutes and we look at any matters that are arising, and that helps us keep on to the things we said we'd do. In this case, we're reviewing a letter of understanding and guidelines. We're reviewing the last 3 months, some operational stuff on achievements and what's been working and what's not. So we're trying to nip in the bud any sources of conflict to do with people not putting things away or other issues. Number 6, at every meeting, we'll be looking at written goals from family members and any changes in goals from the last meeting, so that we get a look at one another's long-term plans, and then we can look at ways of supporting one another to achieve those plans. In this particular case, there was a baby on the way, and so as a family we highlighted, hey, how's this going to change us? How can we make this new arrival, how can we help the parents during that difficult time when it's so time-consuming and emotional and everything else? How can we work together for everything to go as well as possible with a new baby? And then we look at other plans for the particular year. So we've got our diaries and who's wanting to do what and when, and how we can juggle our holidays so that someone's looking after the farm and looking after the pets and livestock and everything else, and it's all planned ahead, so it's to avoid conflict and maximise the chance for people to have their leisure and without affecting the way the business and the family are moving forward. And we were looking at the talents and the personalities of the different members of the family and how we could get synergies. And we were looking at some property development options, and so we were putting those up, big strategic stuff as to what we might be doing there, and looking at other investments too. So although there was some operational stuff in the meeting, there was some good strategic stuff, the goals and the forward-going plans, business-wise and family-wise, and always open to other issues as well, and always listing the date of the next meeting, or preferably the next meetings for the next year, so that everybody can plan for when those meetings might occur. So that's just an example of the sorts of things that might be on a family meeting agenda. You will have your own things you'd want to add at any particular time, but it's important to be reasonably formal. It's important that someone takes the minutes, produces the minutes, gets them out reasonably quickly, they're agreed, and they're reviewed at the next meeting, so that it's quite formal, and you're able to deal with the big things, and everybody's reading the same thing and seeing the same thing. And so that's really just a brief look at family meetings. And so to wrap it up, I really think that regular meetings for communication and planning with farm families are important. They need to be formal, and everyone needs to be included, whether it's by using technologies such as Skype and other meeting technologies where you can actually see and hear members, or whether you're all getting together at a particular point in time for Christmas or whatever, and you're physically meeting. It needs a leader, someone to drive it, someone to make sure it happens. That leadership can rotate, but a strong responsibility to make sure that it happens in our busy lives, that this important aspect of planning and relationship building and so on actually happens on a regular basis and doesn't lapse. You need agreed guidelines, something to come back to when the going gets tough, and if you do that, you've got a really good chance of family meetings being part of building resilient relationships amongst family members, including in-laws, and also really helping develop resilient family businesses as well. And just finish a quote from that renowned management educator, Stephen Covey, that we mustn't forget that families can do things corporations can't, that we're here to live, so we need to enjoy, and meetings are ways of building in leisure and enjoyment, and even enjoying the meetings, enjoying the social get-together of a family. We're social animals, we need to love, and if we can get those bonds within our family and keep them strong, we get enormous satisfaction from that. We need to be learning, and so our family meetings need to be pushing us all the time. What do we need to know in order to do this, to take the next opportunity? If we stop learning, then we're not going to be very exciting people, but also we're not going to be very effective. And one of the things families can do, and one of the biggest things we do with our children and grandchildren, is leave a legacy. It gives us the satisfaction that we've been here for a purpose and that we've left some good things behind. And I think family meetings are just one of the mechanisms that can help us be effective to cover all those things, lead to some really much better outcomes. And I hope the few things I've said there might just give you a bit of guidelines and a bit of energy to make sure that you have regular family meetings. Thank you.